Hello everyone, welcome back. Today I'd like to talk about the hierarchy of angels. If you've seen this before, you might have seen it under a different title. It's called Aquinas Angels. A lot of actual deep study into the Catholic doctrine might bring this around. Thomas Aquinas came up with, one of the ones to come up with, you could say, this theory of the hierarchy of angels. So they usually label it Aquinas Angels. But for here, I'd like to show you what this hierarchy of angels, or this status, this office of angels, and try and show you where this is in the Bible, how it came about, and its little descriptions of these types of angels. So you might not have heard this before, but here's the rundown: is that there are 9 different offices or hierarchies of angels. Now, lowercase a, there would be the group of angels, whereas uppercase A would be angel, the type of angel that is a uppercase A. But here's the 9 versions. These go from most powerful, or the highest level, to the smallest level. Right? If they didn't have angels down here, if they didn't really have a level, they're just grouped in with angels being the overarching word used. But here we have the seraphim, the cherubim, thrones, also known as the wheels, dominions, virtues, also known as might, powers, principalities, archangels, and angels. They're in different colors because these are usually, further subdivided into the 3 groups with 3 types of angels in each. Again, this would be the highest ranking, middle, lowest ranking. And if you study this out, it might make a little more sense, as some verses that Paul uses, he's going to talk about like principalities and powers and mights, dominion, and you usually think, okay, is he just talking about the powers that are on earth, like the United States government's kind of a power, or the state of the United States as a principality, the country, the statehood. That might be your first inclination what he's talking about, but if you look at it this way in a different light, those verses might make more sense. So we're going to start from the top and make our way down and go through little descriptions and just how they're used in the Bible. So first would be the seraphim, the top dog, the highest there is, the seraphim. We're going to see him, or them, in Isaiah chapter 6, verses 1 through 7. So Isaiah 6, 1 through 7 says, "In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw also the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and his train filled the temple. Above it stood the seraphims. Each one had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, with 2 he did fly. And one cried unto another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the post of the door moved at the voice of him that cried, and the house was filled with smoke. Then said I, Woe is me, for I am undone, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For mine eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then flew one of the seraphims unto me, having a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with the tongs from off the altar, and laid it upon my mouth, and said, Lo, this hath touched thy lips, and thine iniquity is taken away, and thy sin purged." So, one of the few references of seraphim here, I think it might be the only one, we have the top dog here, and if you see that last verse, verse 7, took the coal, laid it upon thy lips, thine iniquity is taken away, and thy sin is purged. If they were able to take away iniquity and sin, they must have been a pretty powerful top dog. If God gave them the ability to take away the sin, they're not some just, random angel. They're a top dog. And we see that they had this power because the Bible tells us in Isaiah chapter 6. So next we'll go to the cherubim. In Genesis 3, verse 23, it says, this is when, Adam and Eve were kicked out of the garden. Therefore the Lord God sent him forth from the Garden of Eden to till the ground from whence he was taken. So he drove out the man, and he placed at the east of the Garden of Eden cherubims, and a flaming sword which turned every way to keep the way of the tree of life. Right? So they didn't want Adam and Eve getting into the tree of life, having eternal life, because they ate that. So he put a cherubim in there to protect it. Next, we can go to Exodus 25, talking about the Ark of the Covenant. So Exodus 25, verse 16, "And thou shalt put into the ark the testimony which I shall give thee. And thou shalt make me a mercy seat of gold. 2 cubits and a half shall be the length thereof, and 1 cubit and a half the breadth thereof. And thou shalt make 2 cherubims of gold. Of beaten work shalt thou make them, in the 2 ends of the mercy seat. And make 1 cherub on one end, and the other cherub on the other end. Even of the mercy seat shall ye make the cherubims of the 2 ends thereof. And the cherubims shall stretch forth their wings on high." So they have wings. covering the mercy seat with their wings, and their faces shall look one to another. Toward the mercy seat shall the faces of the cherubims be. And thou shalt put the mercy seat above upon the ark, and in the ark shalt thou put the testimony I shall give thee. And there I will meet with thee, and I will commune with thee from above the mercy seat, from between the two cherubims, which are upon the ark of the testimony, of all things which I will give thee in commandments unto the children of Israel. So again, if you ever see pictures of the Ark of the Covenant, you'll see the two cherubim on each side of the mercy seat looking at each other, and that's what we're talking about here. So we have the cherubim being mentioned twice. Now we're going to get to the seraphim again, but we're going to get with the thrones or the wheels. Talk about them. Ezekiel chapter 1, start with verse 5, and we're going to read all the way to 26. Let's get the full context. So Ezekiel 1:5. Also out of the midst thereof came the likeness of 4 living creatures, and this was their appearance. They had the likeness of man, and every one had 4 faces, and every one had 4 wings, and their feet were straight feet, and the sole of their feet was like the sole of the calf's foot, and they sparkled like the color of burnished brass. Right, so we're getting the 4 faces that you're used to picturing, and the four wings, and they had the hands of man under their wings on their 4 sides, and they 4 had their faces and their wings. Their wings were joined one to another. They turned not when they went. They went every one straight forward. As for the likeness of their faces, they had 4. Had the face of a man, and the face of a lion on the right side, and they 4 had the face of an ox on the left side. They 4 also had the face of an eagle. So we get the lion, the ox, the human, and the eagle with the 4 faces. Thus were their faces, and their wings stretched upward. 2 wings of every one were joined one to another, and 2 covered their bodies. And they went every one straight forward. Whither the Spirit was to go, they went, and they turned not when they went. As for the likeness of the living creatures, their appearance was like the burning coals of fire. And like the appearance of lamps, it went up and down among the living creatures, and the fire was bright, and out of the fire went forth lightning. And the living creatures ran and returned as the appearance of flash of lightning. Now as I beheld the living creatures, behold, one wheel upon the earth by the living creatures, with his 4 faces. The appearance of the wheels and their work was like unto the color of beryl, and they 4 had one likeness. And their appearance and their work was as it were a wheel in the middle of a wheel. So if you look online at these wheels or these thrones, you'll see these essentially wheels, each one rotated, on the y-axis, each one rotated, and you'll see wheels within wheels, and you'll see eyes on them. So you just do, Google a quick picture of thrones or the wheels using the Bible as angels, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Where were we? Okay, verse 16. The appearance of the wheels and their work was like unto the color of beryl, and they 4 had one likeness, and the appearance and their work were as it were a wheel in the middle of a wheel. So that's why we also call them the wheels, but they're the thrones, and we'll see that later. Verse 17. When they went upon the 4 sides, and they turned not when they went. As for their rings, they were so high that they were dreadful, and the rings were full of eyes round about them 4. And when the living creatures went, the wheels went by them. So these wheels were following the others. So that gives you an idea of them being, probably grouped together as they do these 3. That's why the 3 are grouped, because they went with each other. And when the living creatures were lifted up from earth, the wheels were lifted up. So again, they go together. Verse 20. Whithersoever the Spirit was to go, they went. Thither was their spirit to go, and the wheels were lifted up over against them. For the spirit of the living creature was in the wheels. So again, you'll see the wheels and with the eyes on them, but encompassing inside of them was the other angel. When those went, these went. This is verse 21. And when these stood, these stood. And when these were lifted up from the earth, the wheels were lifted up over against them. For the spirit of the living creature was in the wheels. And the likeness of the firmament upon the heads of the living creature was the color of the terrible crystal stretched forth over their heads above. And under the firmament were their wings straight, the one toward the other. Everyone had 2, which covered on his side. And everyone had 2, which covered on that side their bodies. And when they went, I heard the noise of their wings, like the noise of the great waters, as the voice of the Almighty, the voice of speech, as the noise of a host. When they stood, they let down their wings. And there was a voice from the firmament that was over their heads when they stood, and had let down their wings. and above the firmament that was over their heads was the likeness of a throne. Okay, so we're seeing that the wheels and the thrones are used interchangeably. As the appearance of a sapphire stone, and upon the likeness of the throne was a likeness as the appearance of a man above upon it. Right? So if you have a throne, you have someone on it. But these thrones and these wheels went wherever the other angel went. So that's why, again, they're grouped. Now, to see that these thrones and wheels are the same thing, we're going to go to Daniel chapter 7, verse 9. So Daniel 7:9 says, I beheld till the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head like the pure wool. His throne was like the fiery flame, and his wheels as burning fire. So fiery flame, burning fire, kind of talking about the same thing. So the throne is the wheels. Excuse me. So the wheels upon the wheels, now that's describing what they look like, but the name, the proper name for it, for this type of angel, this hierarchy of the angels, this type would be a throne. So these throne angels looked like wheels upon wheels. So we have that. Those are the ones we got, and we got them mostly from the Old Testament. Now we can go to the New Testament. We're actually going to stay in Paul's books because he's going to give us, most of the structure of these last guys. And we're going to see how this can, kind of change your view of what you thought he was just talking about governments or kings or queens. He's actually talking about angels. So we'll start with Romans 8. Romans chapter 8, verse 38. Says, For I am persuaded that neither death nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come. And continues on with the verse, but that's not, the rest of it isn't as important as the first part is look at these groupings. For I am persuaded that neither death nor life, okay, obviously he's comparing death with life. So neither death nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, that's another group, nor things present, nor things to come. So things present, things to come, death, life, so everything in the middle there is one grouping. So he's grouping angels with principalities and powers. Again, usually if you're just thinking about kings and queens and democracies, when they say principalities and powers, you're thinking of countries and governments. That's not what they're talking about here. He's grouping these principalities and powers in with angels. So there's a good chance that there's got to be something about these principalities and powers that makes them be able to group with angels. Maybe they're principalities and powers, maybe they are types of angels, offices of angels. So again, we'll go to another verse with Paul in Ephesians 6. There's actually going to be 3 of them in Ephesians. Ephesians 6, start with verse 11. Put on the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood. Okay, so flesh and blood, that's one group. But who do we wrestle against? But against principalities and powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. So flesh and blood are in one grouping of who we don't wrestle against, right? We wrestle not against flesh and blood. So is a king flesh and blood? Yeah. Is the people or elected officials in the government flesh and blood? Yes. Are people on earth flesh and blood? Yes. So we're not wrestling against anyone you can picture. No, any person you picture, that's not who we're wrestling against. We're wrestling against principalities and powers. So not kings and kingdoms, because we can see those. I mean, you could say I'm right now wrestling against, a law I might disagree with the U.S. government, but that's not who we're supposed to be wrestling against. These principalities and powers are something different. What does he compare these principalities and powers with? Keep reading the verse. Against principalities, against powers, against the rule. It doesn't say and, right? He's still going on with this same list. So you see in here, actually the word and never happens. It's not a separate group. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. So these 4 things at the end here that we wrestle against is one big grouping. He doesn't separate them as you would by using the word and. He doesn't say principalities against powers and against the rulers of darkness and spiritual wickedness. This is all one grouping. They're all similar, very, very similar. So you can see the principalities and powers are these rulers of darkness of world and spiritual wickedness in high places. spiritual. These principalities and powers aren't flesh and blood. It's something spiritual, spiritual wickedness. So it's not against states, governments, kings, kingdoms, presidents. These principalities and powers are similar, or are the rulers of darkness of this world. They are the spiritual wickedness in high places. So the principalities and powers must be angelic. They are not flesh and blood. It's not an earthly government or an earthly kingdom. It's something more. It's something spiritual. So we get more of a reason to believe these principalities and powers are more angelic and not something that we think is on earth. So again, they could be the darkness, rulers of darkness, and spiritual wickedness in high places. So we go to Ephesians 3. So back a couple chapters, Ephesians 3, verse 9. And to make all men see what is the fellowship of the mystery, which from the beginning of the world hath been hidden in God, who created all things by Jesus Christ, to the intent that now unto the principalities and powers in heavenly places might be known by the church the manifold wisdom of God. So these principalities and powers, again, it's the same two that we talked about in Ephesians 6, in heavenly places. So again, these principalities and powers are not people on earth or structures on earth or governments on earth. These principalities and powers are in heavenly places. So that probably makes them angelic creatures. It's not God. There's not God, right? Satan was an angel. He wasn't God, he wasn't Jesus, but he was an angel. He was up there. So these principalities and powers in heavenly places might be known by the church the manifold wisdom of God. He's telling these principalities and powers what this wisdom of God is. So that must be able to understand it. So it must be an angelic type creature or type of angel that these principalities and powers are. We'll go back a couple chapters again to Ephesians 1. Ephesians 1 verse 20 says, which he wrought in Christ when he raised him from the dead, and set him at his own right hand in the heavenly places, far above all principality and power and might and dominion and every name that is named, not only in this world, but in that which is to come. So the principality, power, might, dominion, that's all one grouping. Right? He's putting them all together. There's something similar about them. So we know that if principalities and powers are angelic, offices or hierarchies or structures, type of angels, then the two other things he groups with them are also going to be a type of angel, a hierarchy, a structure, an office of angel. Because they're all grouped together. So that's where we get all these. We haven't been through archangels, but I don't have the verses here with me, but we all know the story of the archangels that did come to earth. So I didn't have to go into the detail because we've all heard of angels, archangels. Most of us have heard of the cherubim and seraphim, but I wanted to go over them just in case you hadn't. So we have two more verses to go through, both again with Paul. So we've been through the Ephesians where we know principalities and powers are grouped with mights and dominions, and they're heavenly creatures. So Colossians chapter 1, verse 16 says, for by him were all things created, that are in heaven and are on earth, one grouping, visible and invisible, one grouping, whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers, all things were created by him and for him. So again, we grouped all these together. The thrones, the dominions, the principalities and powers. So again, we already know the thrones. We've been over that. The thrones are the angelic creatures. We know principalities and powers are. So again, when he talks about the dominions, he lumps them in with these three. Obviously, dominions are talking about angelic creatures too. It's not some earthly dominion. It's not some earthly principality or earthly power. It's not a government. It's not a United States. It's not a European Union. He's talking about angelic beings, not something that was set up on earth. So lastly, in Colossians 2, Colossians 2:15 says, and this is the big one, and having spoiled principalities and powers, he made a show of them openly, triumphing over them in it. So he spoiled principalities and powers. What does that mean? Did God take apart earthly governments, and show triumphing over them in it? What this verse is talking about when he raised Christ from the dead. Did he spoil any earthly principalities and powers when he did this? Was Rome all of a sudden torn apart? No, it wasn't. That kind of still stood there. So what does he mean? Principalities and powers must be angelic creatures. He made a show of them openly. He went against these principalities and powers and made a show of them openly. So obviously these principalities and powers were something negative, and he made a show of them, saying, ha, look what I did. I raised Christ from the dead. He has life. You can't beat us, right? You can't beat Christ. You can't beat me, God in this instance. You can't beat God. And he triumphed over them in it. And we know these principalities and powers are bad, evil, because we read in Ephesians 6. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. So if we put that in this verse, it's saying in having spoiled, in Colossians 2, in having spoiled principalities and powers, who are the rulers of darkness and spiritual wickedness in high places, he made a show of them openly. Isn't that exactly what Christ, or what God did? When he brought Christ back to life, he showed anyone who was against him, any of the evil wickedness in high places and heavenly places, the followers that went and were cast out with Lucifer when he was cast out, the third of angels that went with him, they were all against Christ. They were all against God. But when he brought, and they thought they had won, right? When you crucify Christ, at that point they're like, wow, we won. We just got earth to crucify the Son of God. But then God was like, nah, here's the real plan. I wanted him to do that to take the punishment for people like me, Brent, and we'll bring him back to life so everyone can have life and the justification that comes with him. And he made a show of that openly over these spiritual wickedness in high places and the darkness of this world. So we can easily equate these principalities and powers that are talked about in Ephesians 6 and Colossians 2 as the darkness of this world and spiritual wickedness in high places. They're the same thing. So again, a lot of times when I was reading these verses, I would think, okay, these principalities and powers, these dominions, it's just countries, it's just governments, it's just kings or people or presidents. It's not. When Paul's referring to these principalities, powers, dominions, mights, he's talking about these angels, specifically the ones that followed Lucifer, were cast out and thought they were beating God when Christ was crucified. But God said, nah, this is the plan. It actually works out in our favor. I'm making a show openly of you over it. I'm triumphing over you in it. So, hope that was clear. That's the last of the verses I have. But that's where we get this list from. And I hope that clears up some verses for you. Because a lot of people use these verses and say, hey, look, God set up this power. So God set up this dominion of the United States, right? He set up these dominions, these powers, these principalities. Well, no, it's not talking about earthly principalities, dominions, powers, mights. It's talking about these heavenly ones, these angelic beings. And this is the ranking of them. So, thank you for sticking with me. Hope this was a little more clear to you. And please study on your own. Just all you have to do is just look up these words in the concordance and look at every verse that talks about them. Angels would be a lot. But the rest of these, again, it's pretty quick. There's not a lot out there. But this is where we get this structure, this hierarchy of angels from. This is why we say there's 9 different types. And that don't just think angels is only going to talk about angels and that's it. So if it's principalities, it's not human. Again, it's not human principalities. It's going to be an angelic principality, an angelic power. So again, if you want to look up on your own, again, you'll probably find this more under Aquinas Angels instead of the hierarchy of angels, but it's something fun to look at, and I hope you enjoyed looking at it with me. So I'll see you guys next time.